All right, we'll get started. So welcome to this afternoon's webinar, September the 4th, 2019. And today we'll be discussing the Smart Monsters journey at Curl Curl North Public School. So we'll go through a few housekeeping points. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can click on the speech bubble with a question mark in it. I'll be here in the background throughout the webinar to answer any questions. And at the end, our presenter, Bec, can answer any questions about the webinar. She'll do a 2-minute question segment. If you'd like to earn a certificate for this webinar, it'll be uploaded by next Wednesday onto our training.smarttech.com website. And if you just click the Mark Complete button, which you can see here in the red circle, it'll log you in and you'll be able to earn a badge and a certificate. If you do have any issues with it, you can email me. I will put my email in the chat box in a minute. So I will introduce today's presenter. So today we have Bec Boyle presenting, Assistant Principal at Curl Curl North Public School. She has 15 years plus years in experience in education. She has a Master's of Education, specifically Gifted Education. She's a C, a Smart Exemplary Educator. She's also a Smart Certified Trainer and a Microsoft Innovate Educator. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Bec.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Kendall. I'm just getting this so I can show you my screen. And then we can get started. So today's webinar the purpose of today's webinar is to look at how the Smart Monsters can be used to develop student learning dispositions in the classroom. And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to share with you the case study from my primary school. We've started using the Smart Monsters to begin our journey with student learning dispositions and to introduce those. Hopefully the payoff is some ideas for you about how you might go about using the monsters in your setting in the future. Okay, just trying to find there it is. Sorry about that. Okay, so just a bit of context. So this is my primary school, Curl Curl North Public School. We're located on the northern beaches of Sydney. We have 878 students, so we are quite a large primary school. We're a smart exemplary school, so we have smart boards in all our classrooms, and we've been using smart technology since around 2005, so quite a long journey with smart, and we've been very happy with that all along the way. We're currently in the process of a large construction project, so State Infrastructure New South Wales is completely rebuilding our school. So we're going to have 40 brand new classrooms, which will be flexible, innovative learning environments. And so we definitely feel as though this is an important time for us to be considering learning dispositions as our students are moving into these new settings to prepare them for future learning and also future life. So just a little bit of background as to how I came to be using the monsters. Last year in October, myself and my principal and another colleague, we were attending the Smart Inspire Greatness Conference, which I'm just going to give a little plug for because it was fantastic and it's coming up again this October. So if you can get along to that, I would highly recommend it. When we were there, we we're very lucky because we managed to win ourselves some socks which had these little monsters on it, and then I then managed to win myself a plushie monster, and I was thinking I was very lucky. This is fantastic. I've got this cute monster. I can put it up on top of my smart board in my classroom. I'm sure my class will love it, but didn't really know too much more about the monsters at that point. So then at the same time, we were also starting this journey with regards to visible learning and learning dispositions at our schools. So as part of our strategic plan moving into our new building, this was something that we wanted to introduce based on Hattie's research looking into visible learning and also thinking about how we can develop learning dispositions in our students. So our jurisdiction, which is New South Wales Department of Education, says that learning dispositions are sometimes called habits of mind or dispositions to learning. and they refer to the way in which learners engage in and relate to the learning process. So we had a look at some of the research. So Costa and Calick have done a lot of work on habits of mind, and they basically say that if students don't have these dispositions, then they're not likely to become productive, innovative problem solvers for our economy and for our democracy. So it's pretty important. These big ideas that prepare kids to be lifelong learners, and obviously that's what we all want. So at that point, these two things, my smart monster, and this is Lilo, my smart monster that I have on top of my smart board, then coincidentally I found out that these monsters actually all relate to particular dispositions, and I thought, my goodness, this is brilliant. This is like the perfect coincidence. So in fact, the little monster that I had sitting up on top of my smart board was actually representative of creativity and has a personality, and this is it. So Lilo is generous and playful. She is great at using creativity to solve tough questions. And so I thought, my goodness, this is brilliant, because creativity was one of the dispositions that we'd been talking about. And I was thinking, yep, great. So I've got this little monster. It's something that the kids are very familiar with seeing, because every time I open my smart board in the morning, they see the monsters there. I use the monster quiz. And so they're very familiar with these characters. And so the fact that then these characters had these personalities that related to dispositions was really quite fortuitous. And then I found out that there were 8 more, and they each had a learning disposition attached to them. So it was really quite exciting at that point. So just to introduce you to the monsters, there's a link down here at the bottom where you can actually find out more about the monsters yourself. So we've got Bolly. This is this little pink one, who is a communication monster. She loves to play and learn with friends, and great at communicating. This is Icebox, whose disposition is critical thinking. So she sees the big picture and analyzes tricky questions based on facts. Dimitri down here is the digital literacy monster. So great at finding and making sense of new information and using it to better understand and explain the world. Crystal is for accountability. So she feels pride when she excels, and she owns up when she makes mistakes. In the next 4, we've got Hilf, who is a great leader, and she takes responsibility for her actions and thinks up new ideas. Seesaw is about initiative and can set goals and work hard to accomplish them. Lava Lad is the monster for adaptability. So no matter what the weather or the game or the players, he's great at adapting and making fun. And then finally, Sphere is fair and generous. So he's great at collaborating and working with others. So he's the collaboration monster. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He was actually created by some students in Norway, and they created him based on a Norwegian king. So I believe it's Fair, but certainly if there's anyone out there with Norwegian heritage, you may be able to pronounce that better than me. So at that point, I was thinking, brilliant, we've got these 9 monsters and they've all got dispositions, and some of these dispositions were the ones that we'd actually already been discussing in our staff meetings and our professional learning, and thinking about which dispositions were important for our students to have. And so we decided, look, we're going to start with these monsters, and we're going to start with them because they're familiar. And so what we did was we took each of the monsters and we presented these at a professional learning meeting, and we actually got our staff to then say, okay, well, what is creativity and what does it look like when students at Curly are being creative? So we went through all 9 monsters in this process and tried to come up with ideas and examples of what creativity might look like at Curl Curl North. So for example, they came up with things like students might be presenting their ideas in a number of ways. They might be using their imagination to demonstrate a solution. They might try new things. They might generate new and original ideas. So for each of these dispositions and each of these monsters, we went through and we had a big brainstorm and tried to think about what this looked like across our school, so K through to 6, because we recognise the fact that sometimes these ideas and the way these things look differ, whether it be a kindergarten classroom as opposed to a Year 6 classroom, but then also tried to come up with some things which were sort of across the board. So to give you another example, here's sphere with collaboration. So this is what our teachers came up with. So they suggested that students at Curly enjoy group work, they can share, they can accept the ideas of others, they can join in group discussions, they know how to compromise and negotiate, and they can build ideas by listening to others and working together. So from this, it just meant that we were trying to develop a shared understanding of what these dispositions actually are and what they look like in our school setting. And it was a really good starting point because it was great, created great ownership for our staff as well, because they were able to say, well, you know, these things are, this is how these dispositions look at Curl Curl or look in my classroom. And we were also then able to start a discussion about which of these dispositions did we feel were more critical for us to focus on initially in terms of our move into our new school, and also just in terms of introducing these things to the students. So what we did was we thought, well, we'll engage our stakeholders and we will survey them. So as well as our staff, we surveyed our parents, our students, and our community. So we undertook the 22 EdTech Capability survey with SMART last year. And one of the things that came back as an area for our school to work on was to increase student voice. And that was increasing student voice in planning, so technology planning, but then all sorts of planning. And so that's something that we've really been working on to try and develop. So we surveyed our students and we asked them, of these dispositions, which ones they thought they felt were most important for their learning. We asked them what it would look like in the classroom, if they were being creative or if they were communicating or if they were using initiative. And we also asked them how they thought that this particular disposition would help them learn. We asked similar questions to our parents and to our community so that we could get a bit of a snapshot across all of our stakeholders as to what people really believe was most important and where we should start in this journey on learning dispositions. So from that, we ended up with a few, but the ones that came to the fore as being really important across all of our stakeholders were creativity, as represented by Lilo over here, collaboration, as represented by Sphere down here, and also accountability, as represented by Crystal over here. So we've decided to start by introducing those particular dispositions first, and we will work through the dispositions, but we also were very conscious of the fact that if you try and introduce too much at once, then often you just risk not doing anything particularly well. So we thought, well, if we just focus on a few, and once we've rolled those ones out, then we can look at the next ones. So in terms of actually teaching these dispositions, we've made sure that there's a focus not just on teaching them to the students, but also making sure that our teachers are really comfortable with their understanding of these dispositions and what they look like and what they mean. So what we've started to incorporate into our professional learning sessions is short activities, either at the beginning or the end, which allow us to practice these dispositions and also just to generate some discussion around why we'd have to use particular dispositions. So the photos here, you can see an activity from a staff meeting a couple of weeks ago, where at the beginning of the meeting, we were challenged to work in a team to build a house of cards that was as tall as possible. And the dispositions that we were really looking at in this particular activity were obviously our ability to collaborate, but also our creativity. So there's two quite typical houses of cards there, but there was one group, for example, that actually built their house of cards out of only 2 cards, but they balanced it on top of someone's head. And so, of course, it was then the highest house of cards, and you know, the creativity then started to come out in terms of how people then adjusted their designs to think outside the square a little bit. So that was a way of us then reflecting on, well, in this particular activity, we had to collaborate, we had to be creative. What might this look like if we were doing in the classroom? What sort of activities would we be doing in the classroom where children would have to use these same skills? So in addition to that, we've also planned, and we haven't done this as yet, but the plan is to introduce each of these dispositions to our students. And the way that we've decided to go about that is we actually have vertical groups across our school for peer support. So each of those groups is led by a Year 6 leader, and they have a student from each of the grades. So from kindergarten to Year 5 in that group. So it's a small group of 7, sometimes 8, and led by the Year 6 leader. And what we're going to do is actually have the students working in those groups to introduce each of these dispositions. And we're going to do that through a series of activities. So the first activity there that's represented by the puzzle is actually an activity where all the students get a piece, 2 pieces of a puzzle, and they have to try and work together to solve the entire puzzle, but they have to do so without speaking. So it's about how they can actually communicate, how they can collaborate, and in order to solve that problem, but also the fact that everybody has to play their part, because they can't solve the whole puzzle unless everyone contributes. So very much looking at accountability and collaboration. And the second activity here is a plunger, and the point of that activity is all about creativity. So in a space of a couple of minutes, the students have to come up in their group with as many possible uses for that plunger that they can think of. And the idea here is for it to be fast, quick ideas, not limited by what's possible, but more what being unlimited in your creativity and thinking about how you might possibly use that particular item. And so after these activities are complete, then the teacher who's in the classroom with those groups will then facilitate a discussion around which dispositions that the students used in those particular activities and how those dispositions might be applicable to other activities in their classroom, and getting them to make that connection between the activities that they've just done and things that they're doing in their classroom where they might also need to use those same skills. So in terms of my day-to-day classroom practice, the way that I've been using the monsters, particularly within Smart Notebook, has been particularly with my learning intentions. So in my notebooks, I generally will use the images of the monsters to help to focus students not just on the learning intention with regards to the curriculum, but also a learning intention linking to those dispositions. So for example, this first one is a geography learning intention. So being able to work in a team to develop a website to persuade someone to visit Nepal. So this was following geography work around different places in Asia. And we then, as a class, came up with the fact that we would definitely need to collaborate because it was a group task. We would need to be accountable because different people were responsible for different parts of the website. And the website as a whole was only going to work if everyone did their bit. We're going to have to be creative because we needed to think about how we might persuade someone and what things we could use in our website that would actually increase that ability to persuade a person to actually visit the place that we were advertising. And then finally, obviously, our digital literacy, because this was a digital task. The second example here is from a history lesson. So in this particular example, the lesson was to examine a primary source and explain the key message. So in this case, they actually had 2 cartoons from the late 1800s about federation. This is a Year 6 class, sorry, I should have contextualized that. So I'm teaching a 5-6 at the moment. And they had to look at those cartoons, they had to analyze those primary sources, and they had to try and work out what the key message was. And also have a think about, well, can we trust that message? Who is the person who is actually creating this message? Were they displaying any bias, or was there a stereotype that was represented here? So when we talked about that, we thought, well, definitely it's going to involve communicating, because having to explain that key message was important. And in this particular instance, the students could choose the way in which they communicated that. So some students chose to do that in a written format, and some chose to stand up and give a short oral presentation in order to deliver that, but they needed to think about how they were best going to communicate that message. And then we agreed that obviously critical thinking was going to be important for this particular lesson, because we needed to not just be taking the message at face value, but we needed to be thinking about the time period and the person who wrote it, and how those things might influence how we interpret that particular source. So certainly with my stage 3 class, we've gotten to a stage whereby the kids will now just say things like, oh, we've got to collaborate. We're going to have to be focusing on collaboration in this activity, or we're really going to have to use our initiative in this particular activity. So that language is starting to become part of our classroom. And so it's great because the kids are attending to they're thinking about it, that sort of metacognition around what am I going to have to do in order to be successful in this particular learning task, and they're able to apply that. My Lilo plushie toy is very popular in my classroom, even with 12-year-old boys and girls. They love the opportunity to hold her or put her on their desk. So certainly very appealing and engaging even to Year 6 students. So I guess the positives for me around working with the Smart Monsters was that it was great to start with something familiar. So this is not something that was brand new. It's something that kids were seeing every day in the classroom, and it was a great place to start that discussion because it didn't seem like it was something entirely new. It felt like it was familiar. We often use our Smart tools as a starting point for talking about disposition. So for example, when we're using our collaborative workspace, the obvious things, definitely collaboration, but also our digital literacy and making sure that students know, not to erase somebody else's work, making sure that they are being respectful of the other people using that space. Accountability in terms of shouted outs, for example, being responsible and being accountable for making sure that they contribute to the shouted out in an appropriate way, but also that they're taking responsibility for their learning there in terms of that's their opportunity to participate and to join in that discussion. So these smart tools that we use sort of as commonplace tools throughout the day, they're reinforcing those dispositions as well. So it's a really good point to be able to say to the kids, so what disposition do you think is most important here? And sometimes that turns into a little bit of a debate because obviously there's rarely one disposition working on its own, but then that also proves to be useful discussion often because the kids then can decide, well, is it more critical that we are collaborating in this activity, or is it actually more critical that we're accountable? Each individual is accountable. So great starting point for those sort of discussions. It's really given us a common language. There are a lot of different terms for dispositions and habits of mind and that sort of thing out there, and a lot of those terms overlap to some extent, and so it was great to have a starting point whereby we could say, well, let's start here and let's make sure that we're using this language, and then that, as I said, has started to become more and more commonplace in the classroom. And as I mentioned before, they're definitely highly engaging. The monsters, it doesn't seem to matter what age in a primary school, they really love doing that monster quiz and they like seeing those monsters. I know that with my smartboard, when I change the monsters that are on the opening page, when I load my smartboard up there, oh, you've changed it, there's a different monster. So they get very excited about that. So they're definitely very engaging, and I would argue also very engaging for our staff. So in terms of what I've done in terms of using these monsters in Smart Notebooks, the images are out there for you to use also. So if you go to the Smart Exchange at exchange.smarttech.com and do as I did, which is pop Smart Monsters into the search tool, you'll find there's about 4 pages worth of notebooks and activities there that relate to the Smart Monsters, but 2 that I've just sort of highlighted for you here. The Smart Monster Quiz has actually got the history about each monster, and it talks about how they were named by students around the world and how they came up with those names and those characteristics about those monsters. So that's a really great way to learn about the monsters, but also in that Smart Notebook, you can access images of all of the monsters that you can then copy and paste and put into your notebooks, so you can add them to your pages. There's also some other backgrounds and things that you can use that sort of complement those monsters as well. And then the second one was one that I just noticed when I was doing my research for this presentation, and I hadn't seen it before, but somebody's created a Smart Monsters label reveal, which is another great way of introducing these monsters to your students initially, and not just to the monsters, but to those important characteristics that they represent and that they possess in terms of those learning dispositions. There's a lot more there, so definitely I'd encourage you to have a look, because they there was Halloween monsters, there was monsters that were at the beach in summer clothes, there was winter monsters, so there's lots and lots of variations that you can use, and really you're only limited by your own creativity. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. So as Kendall mentioned before, if you do have any questions, you can just head to that little icon with the question mark in the speech bubble, and you can send through your questions. And I'll just open this up so I can see if we've got any questions coming through. Okay, it doesn't look like there are any questions at this stage, which is totally fine. But if you think later on, oh gosh, I should have asked this question, please feel free to just shoot through an email, and we can certainly get back to you with answers to your questions. So I will pass back over to Kendall at this point.
Great, thanks Bec. I realised at the beginning of the webinar I didn't introduce myself either. So I am Kendall, the Operations Manager here at Smart Technologies for Australia and New Zealand, and I will be moderating most of the webinars as well. So just do a couple of reminders. If you would like any activities, games, and also lessons created by teachers, you can get that on the Smart Exchange, which Bec just mentioned. With the monsters, there's some great ideas on Smart Exchange, especially with the monsters. Again, if you'd like to earn your certificate for this webinar, you can go to training@smarttech.com. It will be up by next Wednesday, and you just click on the Mark Complete button. If anybody has any technical issues, you can just email. I sent the email to the chat box. It is anzinquiries@smarttech.com. So if there's any issues there, if you have any questions about Bec's webinar, or if you'd like a copy of her slides, you can also email that address that's in the chat, and I'll get that over to you. Also, we have our Inspiring Greatness Conference coming up, which Bec also mentioned at the start of the webinar. So we're very excited. We have lots in store. So the landing page is up, which has lots of information about the keynotes and how the workshops are going to be set out this year. So I've just sent a link to the chat there if anyone wants to take a look. You'll at the end of the webinar, I think in about an hour's time, you get an automatic email sent to you with a recording of this webinar. And also in that email, you'll have a link, a registration link, if you would like to register for Inspire Greatness. So you can look out for that. It's going to be very fun this year. And that's it, actually. That's our final webinar for this term. And we'll be starting back up in week 2 of term 4 already. So that's gone very quickly. So that's it from me, and thank you again, Bec. That was awesome and lots of great content today, so that was fabulous. And I will let you all go. We're right on time today as well, which is very nice. Oh, 2 minutes to spare. So there you go. All right, I'll let you all go enjoy this wonderful afternoon. That's if you're in New South Wales, we are having wonderful weather. So I will let you go enjoy that. Okay, thanks a lot. See you later, everybody.